Tradition and survival.
Tradition and survival. This is a very important book authored by Professor Hossein Modarressi. A lot of the times, I want to recommend this book for Al-Islah viewers, because many times people write to us asking us for good recommendations on Ilm al-Rijal, Ilm al-Hadith, Shia bibliographical tradition. And so oftentimes, even when we are presenting research, even as I've been presenting research on Kitab Sulaym bin Qais, what the viewer will be noticing is that all of these works are in Arabic, and they are inaccessible to the reader, to the average lay reader. Well, the good thing is, this book that Professor Hossein Modarressi, Tabatabai, has authored, entitled Tradition and Survival, this book, a bibliographical survey of early Shiite literature. This is the closest thing you will get in the English language to a very good book on Ilm al-Rijal. A lot of the things that we share, research from Ilm al-Rijal, that so-and-so narrator is a liar, so-and-so narrator is regarded as trustworthy, so-and-so narrator is discredited. A lot of this information, you will find it in the English language in this book. So we at Al-Islah are all about empowering the public. We don't just want you to take our word for it. We're trying to empower you and equip you with resources, independent resources, which are available to you in the English language, which you can often use to cross-verify or to cross-check the claims that we are making. So, for example, the good thing about Sayyid Hossein Modarressi al-Tabatabai, what he does in this book, is when he comes to the narrators, he will share with you a very quick summary of what the mainstream books of 12 Shia Ilm al-Rijal have to say about that narrator. So by reading his entries on the different narrators, you can get a sense of what kind of narrator you're dealing with. And so if you have this book, and I'm very grateful, in our case, Al-Islah admins made this available to us. And inshallah, from now on, we intend to, refer people more to this, because this is easier to access. It's available in English and people can check. So for example, everything that we've been saying about Kitab Sulaym, there is an entry on Sulaym bin Qais and Kitab Sulaym in this book. So this is just volume 1. There's supposed to be a volume 2, which is not yet out. And I really hope and pray that it comes out, because that would also be very good.
It's not out yet, not even on PDF?
No, not on PDF. I don't know if he has abandoned the idea of writing a volume 2, or because this book was written way back. Yeah, as you can see, it's written in 2003. It was published.
Dr. Modarressi, Hafizullah, Allah preserve him, does great work. His work, ideally, one of the works that we definitely recommend everyone read from our Shia public is his Crisis, and he's definitely a gem of a scholar, man.
Definitely. Crisis and Consolidation is an amazing book that will give you a very deep insight into the evolution and development of Shiism, and especially 12 Shiism. And it will bring you face to face with the different trends that existed within Shiism before it all crystallized and came together in the form of 12 Shiism.
Dr. Modarressi, who gives that kind of statement about and uses that as kind of his basis about Aban bin Taghlib, that when he defined Shiism, that Hossein Modarressi says that's kind of our version of Shiism, that when people differed about the Prophet, we went to Imam Ali, and when people differed about Imam Ali, we went to Imam Sadiq. So as you can see, that definition of Shiism is very different from what Shiism today is.
Exactly. It's the kind of Shiism that we believe in, basically. That's the earliest Shiism.
100%.
So this here on page 82 of this book, Tradition and Survival, you will see he has his entry on Sulaym bin Qais al-Hilali. So if we can go very quickly through what he has said here. Sulaym bin Qais al-Hilali, this is the entry. So he follows the style of the scholars of Ilm al-Rijal. He will give you the basic information, and then he'll talk about the reliability and all of those things.
I can see allegedly. I can see the word allegedly already.
Yes, because he's an academic. He's very careful with any claim that he makes. So because Sulaym bin Qais al-Hilali is himself a very disputed figure, he has to say allegedly, because we are not 100% certain. We don't have qat'i proof that he really existed. Okay, you have some reports about him, but those could easily be.
That should make that automatically is a question mark when you're making a big case on Sayyid Zara Shahada with Kitab Sulaim. When the guy himself is disputed, does the guy exist or not?
Yeah, because I mean, normally when you have a real person like Ammar, like Salman.
When's the last time you had a debate if Ammar existed or not?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
when's the last time you're like Ammar bin Yasir radiallahu anhu? Yeah, there's debate. Did he exist or not? What do you mean, bro?
No, you can't have that debate in his case because Ammar bin Yasir is part of a mutawatir hadith. Wayha ibn Sumayya taqtuluhu al-fi'atul baghiyah. The hadith predicting that he would be killed by the rebellious party, who would be inviting him to the fire, and he would be inviting them to Jannah. This in itself is a mutawatir hadith, meaning it has been so widely transmitted that it just cannot be a lie. So when you have someone mentioned in a mutawatir hadith, you can never doubt his existence.
On top of the mutawatir hadith, Ammar's life, his parents, what you call existential history. Exactly. Apart from that mutawatir hadith, you've still got enough for Ammar.
Exactly. I mean, see, when you exist, okay, like you are Sayyid Raza Rizvi, you are a real person. Thousands of people know you. And so for someone coming 1,000 years from now, it will be very easy to see that you really actually existed because there will be mention of you in people's diaries, in people's books maybe. I recently saw a mention of your name in a book by a Zaidi author who acknowledged your contribution and your help and guidance.
Yeah. That's a good point. Still, yeah. Salute to our brother.
So do you see, the more we see your name appearing in different sources and accounts and books, the more we become confident that you actually existed. But with Sulaim bin Qais, the sources that mention him, the early sources that mention him, are very few and far between. And so this is why some people are not even sure if he really existed, because if someone is just mentioned in 5, 6, 8, 10 narrations, then it's very easy to invent 5, 6, 8, 10 narrations, right? So you can't completely rule out the possibility that he's an invented figure. So this is why Professor Modarressi has to be very careful. He says Sulaim bin Qais al-Hilali, allegedly a Kufan disciple of Ali, who escaped from Kufa eastward when Hajjaj cracked down on the pro-Alid elements in Kufa. He went into hiding in the town of Naubandagan in Iran's southern province of Fars, where he later died while Hajjaj, who died in 95 AH, was still in power. It is, however, obvious, now listen to this, it is, however, obvious that such a person never existed. So you can see, because he follows the...
Finish the sentence. I want to see that. Finish the sentence. I need to see straight away. They'll be like, you didn't finish the sentence. Finish it.
It is, however, obvious that such a person never existed and that the name is only a pen name used for the sole purpose of launching an anti-Umayyad polemic in the troublesome later years of that dynasty.
Ma salam, Khudafis. Show's finished now. That's it, done.
There is more.
No wonder you were saving this for last.
So then he gives you see, Sayyid Hossein Modarressi is an academic, and whenever he talks about, any figure or any narrator, he immediately gives you the references on the basis of which he's giving you this conclusion. So if you want to find out what kind of sources Sayyid Hossein Modarressi has drawn on to arrive at this conclusion, he gives you a bibliography of the crucial books that you will need to read in order to understand the reality of Sulaim bin Qais. So first he gives you Rijal al-Barqi, and he gives you the page numbers. Then he talks about Rijal al-Kashi, he gives you the page numbers. Ibn al-Nadim's Fihrist, Ikhtisas, Ibn al-Ghadairi, Najashi, Fihrist, Rijal of Tusi. He gives you all the references. Go and read these references and then make up your own mind.
Here's something interesting. He mentioned that Ghadairi saying basically that actually a lot of the scholars were saying there's no mention of him. So Ghadairi defends it by saying I've seen reports, but he's right. Ghadairi does mention that the Shia scholars were saying that Sulaim is unknown.
Yeah, so Sayyid Hossein Modarressi buys that claim, the claim of those scholars who said that.
Look what he said about Ibn Hadid was told by a contemporary Shia scholar that this name had no matching body and that there never was such a person.
Right.
Is this our proof for Sayyid Zara Shahada? Allah maaf kare. Ye kya?
I mean, yeah, this is unfortunate, but we have to present all this. This is what
Oh,
a
here comes the
university, a respectable university
Here
academic.
comes the juicy stuff. Kitab Sulaim. Okay, so first of all, he struck the whole author. Okay, what's left? Let's see what he says about the book.
Right. So you've been through this part, yeah? All of the sources named above rely for their information on the introductory note in the beginning of the book of Sulaim. Early in the 5th century, Ibn al-Ghadairi quoted Shiite scholars as saying that this Sulaim was unknown and that there was no mention of him in any text or report. 2.5 centuries later, Ibn al-Hadid was told by a contemporary Shiite scholar that this name had no matching body and that there never was such a person as Sulaim bin Qais al-Hilali. So this claim and this view is also there. As will be noted below, a prominent recent Shiite scholar also or two agrees with these points. Now you come to Kitab Sulaim bin Qais al-Hilali. This is the oldest surviving Shiite book and one of the rare examples of works surviving from the Umayyad period. The original core of the work, which is preserved to a great extent in the current version, is definitely from the reign of Hisham bin Abdul Malik. So this is when it was actually written. Almost certainly from the final years of his reign, when the long-established Umayyad hegemony was already under threat from troubles concerning his succession. There are repeated references in the work to the 12 unjust rulers. Okay, not to be confused with the 12 Imams. No. There are repeated references in the work to the 12 unjust rulers who usurped the leadership of the Muslim community after the Prophet. So you can see, even in the hadith of Jabir ibn Samara, when he's talking about 12 good rulers, he's actually referring to those whom the Shia of the time are referring to as the 12 unjust rulers. And in the 4th century, what 12ers did was they took the hadith about 12, the hadith invented to justify the rule of 12 unjust rulers, and they tried to...
The 12 just people of Ahlul Bayt.
Yeah, exactly.
You can see the evolution. Okay, very good. Okay, so who do we have here? First two Khalifs, Shaykhain, Uthman.
Yeah, so first two caliphs, Uthman, Muawiyah, obviously, his son Yazid, and 7 members from the offspring of Al-Hakam bin Abil As, the first of them being Marwan. Then he gives you the references from Kitab Sulaim where all of this is mentioned. Then he says, from among the Shiite Imams, only the first 5 are mentioned by name, and it is said that the Imamate will continue in the descendants of of Muhammad bin Ali bin al-Hussein al-Baqir alayhi salam. Here you can stop and reflect on something. If this book is really, as they claim, Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam said, that it is a secret from among the secrets.
That is the evidence that that's an Umayyad book. That's the evidence that it was in Umayyad's time.
Yeah, because it stops, it freezes at the time of Imam al-Baqir.
That means that's when it was written.
Yeah, that's what, otherwise,
Why are you stopping there? Why are you stopping there?
Yeah, no, the Imams could, because this was a secret book, yeah? So the Imams could have mentioned all the names of the 12 Imams, right? From Imam al-Baqir until the 12th Imam, all of the names could have been mentioned.
There's no reason, either you stop at Hussein, because Hussein was alive at the time of Imam Ali and the Prophet, or you go all the way to the 12. Why would you stop at Baqir?
Yeah, because the fabricator who's writing this book
lived
in the time of Imam al-Baqir.
That's my point.
So, and he's obviously not a Zaydi, because if he was a Zaydi...
Exactly. That's a good breakdown. Okay, carry on.
Likewise, it is stated that the masters of paradise among the descendants of Abdul Muttalib were the Prophet, Ali, his brother Ja'far, their uncle Hamza, Hassan, Hussein, Fatima, and the Mahdi. Okay. For other similar statements from the period, these statements obviously predate the formulation of the Imamite theory that considers the Imams to be more excellent than anyone other than the Prophets, including Ja'far and Hamza, a theory already present by early Abbasid period. The hope was that one of the offspring of Fatima, more specifically a descendant of Hussein, would overthrow the Umayyad government. The Shiites at the time were reckoned to be only 70,000. The book focuses only on Kufa, describing the situation of the Shiites there in some detail, a clear indication that the book is from that city, and possibly also suggesting that Shi'ism had not yet spread beyond that region in any noticeable way. Now he talks about the contents of the book. The language of the book is eschatological, depicting some of the historical events of the first century of Islam as seen through a Shiite perspective in the form of prophecies from the Prophet and Ali. In common with books of this nature up to our time, the prophecies have been updated in 2 or 3 stages in later periods by the insertion of words or sentences here and there. So, as you can see, the fabricator died in the time of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, most probably. But the transmitters who came after him, they updated Kitab Sulaym. Okay, so that's how you will find, for example, those of you who will be wondering, okay, but the Mahdi is mentioned. So how come the Mahdi is mentioned when there was no concept of the Mahdi in the time of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam? Well, the answer is because this book was updated. It was constantly updated and things were added to it by the fabricating narrators. So, yeah. So, in common with books of this nature up to our time, the prophecies have been updated in 2 or 3 stages in later periods by the insertion of words or sentences here and there. Wow. There is thus a reference in 2 passages of the book to black banners from the east that would bring the Umayyad Caliphate to an end. So, obviously, the person died before the Umayyad Caliphate came to an end, the fabricator. But people later updated it, and they, the black banners of the Abbasids also find mention in this book, even though it is fabricated in the time of al-Baqir alayhi salam. But this is
but the book's getting constantly more fabrications are getting added. That's why
exactly,
and that's why when people say, obviously from a Shi'i's mind, when he's reading this book, he's like, look, this has to be from the Imams because it's talking about the future, but in reality, someone's filling in the blanks.
Exactly. As time passes, and how do we know? Because if you look at the lower chain of the downward chain of Kitab Sulaym, there are liars in it. Yeah. So you think those liars are just receiving Kitab Sulaym as it is and honestly passing it as it is? So they're taking this fabricated book, they're reading it, and they're saying, okay, it's got a lot of good stuff, juicy stuff that suits our agenda. But it also is missing. It has a lot of things that need to be updated. A lot of things that we have added to the Aqidah that now need to be
1.0. This is Ghulu 1.0. We need to give it
Ghulu 2.0. Exactly. So they're constantly updating the software.
That's fair enough. Everyone has a right to update software.
Right. So the reference, so the reference is obviously an updating. The mention of the black banners, was not there in the original, obviously, but the fact that it is there today is obviously a case of updating and does not necessarily point to a Hashemite Shiite sympathy.
Yes,
as the book has a clear Alid pro-Husseinid provenance. Now let's look at this. There is also a reference to 12 Imams from among the descendants of Ali who would succeed him. 12 Imams from the descendants of Ali. Ali is the first Imam, 12 Imams after him, 13 Imams.
What issue? Same issue discussed.
He gives you the page numbers where you'll find the narrations about this. He says the relevant passage is inserted. So this reference to 12 Imams from the progeny of Ali was not there in the original book. Because remember, in the time of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, no one knew that there would be 12 Imams, right? No. So Sayyid Hossein Modarressi is making it clear that the relevant passage about 12 Imams from the progeny of Imam Ali, that is this whole 13 Imam hadith, is a later insertion. It is a passage that is inserted in a paragraph that describes how God looked at the people of the earth and selected from among them the Prophet and Ali as his chosen ones. So this is what the original book had mentioned, that Allah looked at this earth and he chose the Prophet and Imam Ali. So the ghulat of the time of Imam al-Baqir, this is what they believed. But then this follows the statement about the masters of paradise noted above. The passage then continues by asserting that God then took a second glance at the earth and chose after the Prophet and Ali 12 legatees of the descendants of the Prophet to be the elect of his community in each generation. The style itself identifies this last line as a later insertion, obviously added after the number of the Imams was finally determined early in the 4th century. So do you see? This was added in the 4th century after the Shias had already realized that they are not going to be, the 12er Shias had realized that there are not going to be any more Imams after the 12th Imam.
Yeah.
So this was added after the 4th century, early in the 4th century rather. So this edition was of course a careless slip, as the contributor had failed to note that it would raise the number of the Imams, which when we include Imam Ali himself, to 13. Najashi, in his book on page 330, reports that a 4th century Shiite scholar, in a book he wrote for a Zaydi patron, and in order to please him, used this passage from Kitab Sulaym, okay, to argue that Zayd bin Ali, the eponym of Zaydi Shi'ism, was also an Imam, adding his name to the list of the Imamites, 12 Imams. This was the only report on the number of the Imams in the version of the Kitab Sulaym available to the historian Mas'udi in the early 4th century. He gives you reference to Mas'udi's book At-Tanbih, pages 198 to 9. Page 198 to 199. However, soon after that, when Nu'mani wrote his Kitab al-Ghaiba around 340, there was at least one copy of the Kitab Sulaym with many further references inserted here and there on the final number of the Imams. The sentences were now more carefully drafted to avoid the problems caused by the former passage. These appear in the printed versions of the book. He gives you the references from Kitab Sulaym. These references made the book a major source for the Imamites' argument that the 12th Imam lived in occultation. So basically, the passages that they added after the 4th century, the 12ers started using those passages to prove that there is a 12th Imam. According to the introductory note at the beginning of the work, the book was entrusted by its original author to Aban bin Abi Ayyash, a hadith transmitter who was then very young. Aban in turn gave the work to another transmitter 2 months before his death. Now look at this. The book is one written by commoners for commoners. Okay, it's not written by, if you look at this is a judgment that Sayyid Modarressi is passing on the book on the basis of its contents. So he's saying if you look at the book, it is written by awam, it's written by lay people. The fabricators of this book were not very scholarly, specialist, expert kind of people. They were common people who wrote the Kitab Sulaym for common people. It is a display of primitive, unsophisticated beliefs among the rank and file of the Shiites of Kufa during the late Umayyad period, with clear residues of the usual Kaysani exaggerations on the virtues of the house of the Prophet. Kaysanis are a Ghali sect who used to believe in the imamah of Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiya, and they were the first people to believe in the concept of ghaiba, that Muhammad ibn Hanafiya had gone into ghaiba and that he would emerge before the end of time to establish the government of truth and justice.
Sounds very familiar.
Yeah, this basically, they were the first people to come up with this idea that an Imam from Ahlul Bayt, because Muhammad ibn Hanafiya is the son of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and his name is Muhammad.
When he died, they said the same thing, that he's gone to a mountain, he's gone to Ghaiba, same stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. So the people who believed this were called Kaysani. So you can also find Kaysani elements and exaggerations on the virtues of the house of the Prophet in Kitab Sulaym.
It also refers to
the Umayyad positions on some of the matters discussed. Many such popular, unsophisticated Shiite lines of interpretation and belief were later transformed and developed by the Shiite rationalists of the 4th and 5th centuries. So a lot of these popular, unsophisticated Shia readings of history were later actually made more mainstream by Shiite rationalists of the 4th and 5th centuries, like Sheikh Mufid, Sayyid Murtada. They took these unsophisticated beliefs and they turned them into sophisticated aqidah and ideology. Later Shiite scholars therefore had problems with the ideas expressed in the book, as well as a number of factual errors in it. Now, this can be a whole series. You know that scholar from the Hausa that we were discussing? He has been writing a whole series on this, factual.
Yes, he has, yes. And we mentioned one report and there's a lot more to come.
Oh yeah, there are many examples that he has given of historical errors and factual inconsistencies in Kitab Sulaym.
And he quotes Mufid in his correction of Sheikh Saduq, that the book is unreliable and that corrupt material has been incorporated in it. As you can see, early scholars like Mufid were on the board and they were like, nah, this book, we need to basically cross-check it because this book has suffered corruption.
Exactly. However, the text being such an old and persistently popular book among the Shiites, and its chain of transmission up to the first alleged transmitter, Aban bin Abi Ayyash, being conventionally held to be strong, some Shiite scholars of the early centuries and later times thought that Aban, who was generally known as an unreliable transmitter, may have been responsible for the corrupt material. And this is the claim of
Ghadari thought that, yeah.
Exactly. Also emphasizing, Ibn al-Ghadairi also emphasizing that the book is undoubtedly a fake and that Aban is the one suspected of the forgery.
Very good. Very good.
So then he gives you the references for this. Ibn Dawood also points to this. He repeats Ibn al-Ghadairi's remark. And then Hossein Modarressi mentions how a prominent recent Shiite scholar, while confirming that the book is a fake, holds that this forgery was done for a good purpose, and that its maker piled up all sorts of data, some well-known, others incorrect, but in general aimed to serve a purpose. He also supports the idea that the book is late Umayyad, before the number of the unjust caliphs went beyond 12, as it prophesied that the right to rule would then be restored to those entitled to it. So do you see, in Kitab Sulaym, there's also a report that claims that there will only be 12 unjust caliphs, after which the government of truth and justice will be established. But we all know that did not happen.
The Abbasids came, who was actually worse than Banu Umayyah.
Exactly. So that's how you know that the prophecies of the Kitab Sulaym are also fake and false. They're fabrications. Because the Prophet and Imams could not have made such a false prophecy. So he also supports, this recent scholar, a prominent recent Shiite scholar, also supports the idea that the book is late Umayyad, before the number of the unjust caliphs went beyond 12, as it prophesied that the right to rule would then be restored to those entitled to it. Yani it would go back to the Ahlul Bayt, but it did not. This, however, never came to pass, as the number of the usurpers increased and the right did not return to those legitimately entitled to it. And then he gives you the reference to the work of that prominent Shiite scholar, who is Abul Hasan al-Sha'rani. He's a famous commentator on Al-Wafi and Al-Kafi. So it should thus be concluded that one or more of the early transmitters came across this book and related it by wijada as against sama. So wijada means you just get a book anywhere and you pick it up and you start transmitting it, as opposed to sama. Sama means you go to the sheikh, who is the author of the book, you listen
it out to him and you confirm the book with him.
Exactly. So this book was not confirmed through sama. It was just received through wijada. You know, someone passed it on to someone else, and they've been passing on the parcel ever since. Direct hearing of the material from the author, which is sama. Meanwhile, someone also added the story about the genesis of the book. The text is at any rate older than 2 months before Aban bin Abi Ayyash's death, which was in 138. Owing to the fact that a number of insertions were made in the book, there are variations among its different manuscripts, as described by Agha Buzurg. So Agha Buzurg al-Tahrani, in his book Al-Dhari'a ila Tasanif al-Shi'a, in volume 2, pages 152 to 159, you can see, because you see, people kept on adding material to Kitab Sulaym, and there were different manuscripts. So if you added something to a later manuscript of Kitab Sulaym, you would not find it in other manuscripts, because it's a later edition. And the one who added it...
The edition had some extra stuff added to it.
Yeah. Because if you add something to a book at the first level before it is transmitted, then that edition will get transmitted to all the recipients. But if a book has already been transmitted and it's gone to so many different people, and then you take one manuscript and you add something to it, then that edition will only be found in that manuscript, and then the rest of the manuscripts which are transcribed from that added manuscript, or that interpolated manuscript.
And that's why it says, fortunately, later accretions seem always to have been in the form of insertions and additions rather than replacements and alterations.
Yeah, exactly. So instead of changing the whole hadith,
it's constantly being added.
Yeah. So the old core is therefore preserved in most of the manuscripts. So the old core, for example, was the Prophet telling Imam Ali that there will be imams from your progeny. But then there is an addition that there will be 12 imams from your progeny.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
And so that makes the number 13.
But at the cost of obvious contradictions. That's the point.
Yeah, which is 13 imams is an obvious contradiction with 12 are aqidah. Some of these variations are noted in the editions of the book. A number of Najaf editions, Beirut, Qom. The one used here is the Najaf Haidariya edition.